Hi, I'm Jayati. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ishaan, and I'm a spoken word poet. And I've been for about 5, 6 years now. I formed my own collective about 3 years, 4 years ago. And since then, I've been performing around the city, judging various competitions at colleges, and basically performing at whatever events are put up.
Nice. So, can you tell us what exactly is slam poetry?
So, slam poetry is basically competitive poetry recitation, or rather competitive poetry performance, because the aspect that separates it from poetry recitation is that it's a lot more active. It has a lot to do with trying to make a connection with the audience beyond just reading your poem out, and sort of trying to perform to them as opposed to reading a poem out at them. So when this activity is done competitively, it's called slam poetry.
And it has no rigid rules, right?
No, not at all. Actually, like our traditional idea of poetry is that it's supposed to be written, in your AB rhyme scheme, where the last words rhyme, and that's how it was taught to us in school, which is why I was never interested in poetry in school, in fact. But the beauty of slam poetry is that there's like no expectations of you. There's no limits on what you can talk about. Your poems can be completely free verse, so people find their own meters. Some people just have their own rhythm to their poems. Some people, perform as like they're rapping. It's incredible.
I think it's a lot more diverse. And
for sure.
okay, so when did you first start writing poetry, and what exactly inspired you to do so? Is there anything in particular that pushed you to write?
So I always liked to write since I was a kid. I think that's the only way that I really learned to express myself. And as I grew older, I entered into various parts of public speaking. But like I said before, I never had any interest in poetry. I never had any interest in writing poetry. I genuinely thought that this was something I couldn't do. What really got me into it was coming across some videos of spoken word poetry online. There's so many channels. Now we have some Indian channels as well, but back then there were a couple of channels from the United States, and there were a lot of videos of people performing poetry online. And I happened to go on and I happened to watch these people, and I was mesmerized. Like, this is
I think there was a phase when this slam poetry thing got pretty viral, and like a lot of people started doing it suddenly, and then it just became a thing.
Yeah, definitely. Like a couple of very popular names. You had Yoni Hilborn,
exactly.
and Sarah K. Everybody's watched them. So I also came across one of those videos, and I was astonished. I didn't know people could do that. I didn't know you could publicly speak, but also like publicly speak so nicely, so poetically, So I think that's what that's what got me into it. It sort of put my mode of expression together with what I used to do for recreation, which was public speaking. So now I could write something and I could read it out, or I could perform it out for people, and people would happily listen. So initially I didn't approach it like one would approach it as poetry. Like, I didn't approach it as an aesthetic activity. I just approached it as a way to like write 8 lines and be able to,
to be able to like express yourself in front of everyone and have people like listen to you.
Yeah.
So when did you first like start performing on stage, and what were the platforms you started off on?
So my first performance was actually in the preliminary rounds of this competition that had been organized. I didn't know it was a competition, but my friends informed me of an event happening, and I registered for it. And it turned out to be the first round for the Great Indian Film and Literature Festival.
Oh wow!
So I went there and I performed in the initial rounds, and I think this was specifically set up right around the time, as you said, when slam poetry was going viral and everybody was learning about it, and it has especially become a craze among teenagers and like young adults. So people going to college were there, and I think I was the only one from school at that time. I was ending 11th grade.
That sounds like a great start, man.
Yeah, it was it had a lot of advantages. In fact, like I ended up making it to the finals of that competition. I ended up winning that competition, surprisingly enough, and from there on it just snowballed. So by then there were a lot of independent organizations. So there was this independent magazine called the Zine, and it used to organize regular poetry slams. And there was this one online literary publication called Art Refurbish, and they used to organize regular poetry slams. So as soon as as soon as that competition was over, I came into touch with a lot of other people who had performed with me, and they were all college students. And they introduced me to platforms like these. Like there's this one platform, it's still doing really well. It's called Poets Collective.
Oh yes, I've heard about it.
Yeah, so they're another sort of informal collective of poets that meet and share poetry. So I started going for all these meets, all these events, open mics that were held by all of these bodies at the time.
I think now there are a lot of communities that have started doing this. They started organizing intimate gigs and like gigs at home, which is like really intimate and really like people come together and share their stories. I think it's really nice.
Yeah. I think the whole scene has really evolved. In fact, earlier there used to be this space set aside only for slam poetry, and it was done only by maybe 2, maybe 3 names. Events were organized. And today, like you said, like there's a number of organizations, and they're focusing on so many things as well. Like it's led to a great evolution also. Like now people are starting to perform poetry to music in the background. I saw this one performance that was a person reciting poetry and somebody dancing to it. So it's really taking shape. Like as the number of organizers and the number of platforms grow, the art in itself also begins to grow and evolve.
True. So what do you usually find yourself writing about?
I think I write a lot about myself. I mean, it sounds very narcissistic, but I really believe in not being able to, I really believe that I'm unable to write about things that I'm very personally invested in, or that I feel like are coming from my own voice. So it's difficult for me to write a lot about social causes that I can't identify with, right? I see myself as an ally, but I can never go up and talk about that cause as if I'm the center of it. So as a result of this, I often write about myself a lot. I write about issues that I relate to. So initially when I was younger, I wrote a lot about love, and I wrote a lot about heartbreak, as one does at that age. And then gradually my themes have evolved into ideas like mental, exploring the avenues of mental health and what it's like to explore that aspect of yourself, since it's so new to me, to realize that also is a legitimate part of me.
And where do you think like this mental health and poetry thing align? Because a lot of your poetry also revolves around mental health.
Yeah, definitely. I think the answer to that goes back to what I started with, that writing for me was always a form of expression. And it's a strange thing becoming aware of your mental health, becoming aware that mental health is a concept that to keep, like it seems so simplistic when you think about it. You have to keep your mind healthy, but to realize that the mind is another part of you, it takes us a long time to be able to do that. So once you realize it, to be able to put that truth out there into the world, because it's very difficult to keep it in yourself. The worst part about having problems with your mental health might be that it forces you to keep these things within you, or it tells you that you're all by yourself. And I think poetry counteracts that. It allows you to put it out there into the world. It allows you to express it, and also express it in not necessarily the most graphic, out there manner. You can hide things in metaphors.
It's a healthy manner, I think, and it's nice to have people like support you and encourage you to.
Absolutely, and it's nice to have people relate to what you're saying. It's nice to have somebody come up and say that, oh, what you wrote, like what you wrote there, like I identify with it. I faced the same thing. So yeah.
Okay, so what's the poetry scene like in India? How's the circuit?
So I think since I started, it's grown a fair bit. I think it reached out to many different cities, especially the metropolitan cities. The ones I'm most aware of are Delhi and Bombay. But last I checked, I think Chennai and Calcutta had a very vibrant scene also.
What about
Yeah.
the people in the circuit and the community like that has been formed?
So I think we talked about like YouTube channels. I think a lot of Indian YouTube channels have come up. So there's channels like Anirez, and there's a lot of standalone ports also that have come up from there. So people like Aranya Johar, she went viral across the internet, with over 1 million views on her poetry. And platforms like Commune are huge. Like they have like thousands of people in attendance at their venues. They managed to bring international poets, like people I named before, Phil K, Sara K. They managed to bring them to India to perform here. And now they host an annual what they call a Spoken Fest, which is a festival specifically for spoken word. And that's amazing. Like it's the number of platforms have grown. There's now YouTube channels with hundreds and thousands of subscribers, that are putting out content regularly.
It's really started to become like an actual thing, and people have started doing it more often and like getting into stuff like this.
Yeah. I think it's becoming for many people, it's becoming a legitimate career option for that matter. Like I know of people who are making money off of, being poets. And
I think that's a great thing, because like being restricted to certain like jobs is like pretty boring, and now being in this generation, I think we have like a lot more freedom to do whatever we want.
Definitely, and these avenues make it so much easier. Like we may have heard of Hussain Hydari. He was this poet from Bombay. Last I checked, I think he performed with Commune a few times. Last I checked, I think he wrote dialogues for a few movies that came out recently. So it's incredible what people can do, like to achieve their dreams if they have a platform,
That's true. What do you think is the future of slam poetry? Like, we know what's happening right now, but what do you think is the future? What does it hold?
I think there's a couple of aspects to it. I think I personally would love to see a lot of people get published. I would love to see more poets come out with, written work and, work that is, that's sold in books and copies. Because I've seen a lot of international poets do that. A couple of earlier channels like Button Poetry are now full-fledged publishing houses as well. They publish books for their poets, for the poets on their roster. So I'd love to see that change happen, because I think poetry, if you write poetry, it isn't a matter of whether it stays on paper or whether you're speaking about it. So I think that should definitely, that'd be a great way to get more poetry out there. I also feel like slam poetry in itself is going to continue, reaching out to a lot of people in many different ways. Like colleges have, every college now has a literary society, and one regular event that they have is slam poetry competitions. So I see that happening more. I see a lot more people perhaps starting more organizations, perhaps starting more collectives, to create like performance spaces dedicated just to slam poetry. So I really think so. But I also think this is an industry that will find its way online also. Like a lot of people are going to find a niche reciting poetry online and performing poetry for people online and just be known for that. So I'm really looking forward to that too.
Okay. It was really nice talking to you, Ishaan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jayati. It was lovely.